There's a certain kind of silence that speaks louder than words. A shift in a glance, a change in someone's voice, a pause that lingers just a little too long. You feel it before you understand it, and when you finally do, it's already reshaped everything you thought was true. That's the kind of world Amy Griffin pulls you into with The Tell, a world where perception isn't just power, it's survival. Amy Griffin is known for her ability to peel back the polished layers of modern life and reveal what's simmering just underneath: doubt, desire, deception. She writes not just with precision, but with empathy. You don't just follow her characters, you feel what they feel, you squint through their blind spots, you hold your breath alongside them when the truth begins to crack through. The Tell, released in recent years, is a masterclass in slow-burning psychological suspense. But more than that, it's a reflection of our hyper-connected, emotionally fragmented lives. At its surface, The Tell is a story about a woman, a mother, a friend, a professional, whose life seems ordinary, even picture-perfect. But something's off. And the more she starts to trust her instincts, the more those cracks begin to widen. Amy Griffin doesn't rush the unraveling, she invites you to sit in the tension, to notice the micro-moments that hint at something deeper. A flinch. A smile that doesn't reach the eyes. A carefully chosen word that says more by what it doesn't reveal. The story doesn't scream, it whispers. And that whisper is more chilling than any scream could be. What makes The Tell especially powerful for today's world is how deeply it understands the complexity of human interaction. In a time when we're overwhelmed by noise, constant updates, curated images, polished personas, this book reminds us that the most important signals aren't the ones shouted the loudest. They're the ones barely spoken. And if you're someone navigating fast-paced meetings, high-stakes conversations, or emotionally charged environments, that insight is everything. Learning to read what's unspoken can shift the way you lead, the way you love, and the way you protect what matters most. Amy Griffin's writing is built on tension, but not the cheap kind. This isn't about jump scares or plot twists for the sake of drama. It's about emotional truth. About what it means to know something before you can prove it. About what it costs to listen to your gut, and what it costs when you don't. For busy professionals, The Tell offers more than an escape, it offers a mirror. For students, it's a masterclass in emotional intelligence. And for anyone who's ever questioned their own intuition, it's a haunting, beautiful validation that instincts are real, and paying attention could change everything. This is not just a story. It's a study in human behavior, trust, and the quiet clues we all leave behind. So get ready to slow down, lean in, and listen closely, because in this story, every detail matters. And once you start noticing the tells, you'll never see people the same way again. Let's dive in part 1, the surface of things, when everything looks fine. Every story has a beginning, but this one doesn't come crashing in with a bang. It begins quietly, like a feeling you can't quite place. Like the difference between silence and stillness. Amy Griffin opens The Tell not with fireworks, but with a life that, on paper, works. A career, a husband, children, a house that gets cleaned on Sundays, and calendars that run with precise appointments and plans. It's the kind of life that earns nods of approval from neighbors and coworkers. The kind that looks successful. The kind that's easy to envy. And yet, Amy lets you in on something else. A presence behind the perfection. A flicker behind the eyes. Right from the start, you can feel it, something is off. It's not spelled out. She doesn't hit you over the head with it. But it's there. A sense that the balance she's worked so hard to maintain is more fragile than it appears. Her tone isn't bitter or self-pitying. It's reflective, mature, and raw in its honesty. She's not asking for sympathy. She's asking us to look closer. To tune into the space between what's said and what's felt. As she moves through her day-to-day, school drop-offs, work deadlines, texts that go unanswered, there's an emotional undercurrent that's hard to ignore. She's watching closely. Listening more than she's speaking. Noticing the details that don't quite fit. The way her husband's smile doesn't linger. The way his stories start leaving out little things. The growing quiet between them at the dinner table. And most of all, the feeling inside her, an ache, an unease, that says pay attention. This section isn't dramatic. It's intimate. Amy is laying the groundwork for what's to come, and she's doing it with care. She's building trust with the reader, just as she's learning to trust herself again. What you realize as you listen is that this part of the story isn't about discovering a lie. It's about recognizing that something within you knows the truth long before you're ready to face it. She talks about the social scripts she followed. The idea that if you just work hard, show up, do the right things, life will reward you with peace. That formula, she says, works until it doesn't. And when it stops working, no one tells you what to do next. Especially when everything still looks fine. The brilliance of Amy's storytelling here is that it mirrors real life. Most of us don't stumble into crisis all at once. It sneaks in. It disguises itself as fatigue, irritability, second-guessing, sleepless nights. And that's what makes this section so relatable, because we've all had moments where we knew, deep down, that something wasn't right, and we kept moving anyway. This isn't just the start of a personal unraveling. It's the beginning of something much bigger, the awakening of a voice. A voice that has been quieted for too long. A voice that is starting, finally, to ask the right questions. So as you sit with part 1, don't rush past it. This is the part where you tune your ear. Because the tale doesn't yell, it whispers. And once you start hearing it, you'll realize, this isn't just Amy's story. It might be your story too. Let's move into part 2, the unraveling, seeing what you don't want to see. If part 1 was about sensing the cracks, part 2 is where Amy begins to feel the ground shift beneath her. She's no longer just noticing things, she's starting to question them out loud, even if only to herself. And with that comes a kind of internal unraveling. Because once you let in the possibility that your reality might not be what you thought, there's no going back. It begins with small moments. Her husband's phone buzzing late at night. The way his explanations feel just a little too practiced. The growing distance that's no longer just emotional, it's physical. A coolness that has moved in between them and settled like fog. It's in the way he avoids eye contact. In the way conversations stay on the surface, never dipping below. It's not one thing. It's everything, slightly off. Amy describes these moments with devastating clarity. Not in a melodramatic way, but with the ache of someone who desperately wanted to believe the best, and now is starting to realize she might have been fooling herself. And yet she's not angry. Not yet. She's heartbroken. Confused. Torn between what she feels and what she wants to believe. This section of the memoir is emotionally heavy, but it's also deeply relatable. Anyone who's ever suspected something wasn't right in a relationship will feel the rawness of what she's experiencing. The second-guessing. The searching. The internal tug-of-war between love and truth. She doesn't want to become suspicious. She doesn't want to be that person, the one who checks phones, who reads into silences, who starts connecting dots no one else sees. But when trust starts to slip, so does everything else. Amy begins reflecting on moments from the past that didn't sit right but were brushed aside. A change in schedule. A missed call. The way he once looked at her, and doesn't anymore. And as she reflects, we reflect with her. We begin to understand that this isn't just about infidelity. It's about identity. About being forced to re-examine who you are when the foundation of your life begins to shift. And yet, Amy isn't spiraling. She's observing. Listening. Gathering. She's stepping into the quiet role of investigator, trying to piece together a version of the truth that might finally make sense. The pain is growing, yes, but so is her awareness. She's no longer numbing it. She's feeling it, all the way through. This part is where you, as a listener, start to feel a bond with her. You're not just watching her world come apart, you're watching her awaken. And it's haunting, because she's so clear. So smart. So aware. And still, she's trapped in that painful place between knowing and confronting. The tale in this section becomes not just a book title, but a metaphor for everything she's starting to decode. Body language. Tone. The gaps between what is said and what is meant. It's almost like watching a detective slowly realize the suspect is someone they love. And just like that, the unraveling begins. Next is part 3, the discovery. When the lie meets the light. By this point, Amy is standing in a place most of us fear. That moment when the truth can no longer be ignored or unspoken. The signs that once felt subtle now scream in her face. There's a shift in the air, a heaviness that won't lift. This is where suspicion becomes fact. The lie she was hoping wasn't there. It's suddenly right in front of her. But here's the thing about discovery. It doesn't always come in some big, cinematic blow-up. Sometimes it's quiet. It's a sentence that doesn't match the timeline. A message seen over someone's shoulder. A name that comes up one too many times. And Amy? She catches it. The tell. That tiny inconsistency that cracks everything open. This part of the book isn't just about infidelity. It's about the unraveling of trust. The way a single truth, when finally uncovered, sends shockwaves through every memory you thought was real. Amy takes us inside her mind, and it's raw. There's heartbreak, of course. But also shame. How did I not see it sooner? How long have I been living in this half-truth? How much of my life was a lie? And as she confronts the truth, she's also forced to confront herself. The choices she made. The parts of herself she had ignored in order to keep the peace. The way she silenced her intuition, just to avoid disrupting the illusion of happiness. One of the most powerful things about this section is the way Amy captures the grief that comes with discovery. Not just the grief of betrayal, but the grief of losing a version of yourself. The version that trusted. That believed. That loved without hesitation. That version of her doesn't survive this chapter. And in many ways, it's the most painful goodbye. But it's also the beginning of something else. Because even in the heartbreak, there's clarity. She's no longer guessing. No longer doubting. There's something strangely empowering about finally knowing, even when the truth hurts like hell. It gives her the freedom to make choices, not from fear, but from truth. She's no longer tiptoeing around the edges. She's standing in the center of it all, ready to face it head-on. Amy also explores the ripple effects of betrayal. The way it seeps into your identity, your friendships, your sense of safety in the world. She questions everything. She mourns deeply. But she doesn't collapse. In fact, this part of the book is where her quiet strength begins to emerge. It's where you feel her shifting, not just as a narrator, but as a woman reclaiming her power. She doesn't scream. She doesn't fall apart in some dramatic, made-for-TV breakdown. No. She stands in the truth with trembling hands and a breaking heart, but she stands. The tell in this section takes on a deeper meaning. It's not just about noticing someone else's lie. It's about discovering your own silence. The things you told yourself to stay comfortable. The ways you betrayed your own knowing. And in facing that, Amy begins a deeper journey, not just toward healing, but toward herself. Next is part 4, the aftermath, grief in the quiet places. Once the truth is out there, once the weight of betrayal has crashed over Amy like a wave, something unexpected happens: silence. It's not the dramatic silence you might expect after a fight or confrontation. No, this is the silence that fills the spaces between moments, where the real depth of the betrayal hits. After the initial shock, after the confrontation, what comes next isn't just pain, it's a heavy, suffocating quiet that settles deep in the bones. The grief is so subtle, it almost feels like a lull, and yet it's impossible to escape. Amy captures this beautifully. This is the part of the journey where healing hasn't even begun to take root. The hardest part is simply existing in the space that used to be full of life, love, and trust. But in this void, Amy does something incredible. She lets herself feel. She doesn't brush the pain under the rug. She doesn't try to stay strong. She leans into it, which, though it sounds counterintuitive, is the start of her recovery. It's tempting to want to move on as quickly as possible, to jump to the resolution, to fix the broken parts and patch things up with a neat little bow. But Amy doesn't do that. She gives herself permission to mourn. She lets herself break in the ways she needs to. She walks us through the waves of emotion, days when she's completely numb, and then others where anger rushes in so fast it takes her breath away. She writes about sitting with the grief, and how, at times, it feels like there's nothing left of her but the pain. That raw honesty is what makes the tell so impactful. In this section, it's not just about betrayal. It's about everything that follows: the silence, the disbelief, the questions that continue to linger. She describes the mornings when she wakes up and for a few seconds, forgets that everything has changed. But then reality crashes in, like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. What do you do with the empty space that used to be filled with the comfort of trust? How do you sleep in a bed that no longer feels safe? How do you walk into a room that used to be your sanctuary, and now feels like a stranger's house? And it's not just about the silence and the space around her. It's the internal silence that comes with no answers, no immediate solutions. There's this profound disconnection with her own emotions at times. Amy feels like she doesn't even recognize herself anymore. Who is she really? The woman who trusted, who loved so deeply, or the woman who now sees betrayal in the face of everything she once believed in? The most striking thing here is how Amy questions her own identity, how long she's been living with this unconscious denial. And there's no easy way out of that kind of reflection. It's gut-wrenching, uncomfortable, and humbling. But through all this, Amy does something incredibly brave. She stays present with herself. Even though every fiber of her being is screaming to run from the pain, she stays. She allows herself to sit in that emotional wilderness. She writes about how much she's had to lean into discomfort, even when she feels like she might break apart. And it's in this brokenness that something new starts to form. The grief she feels here isn't something to avoid. Instead, it's something to lean into. The grief of loss, not just of trust or a partner, but of herself. But here's where the shift happens. As Amy moves through these emotional highs and lows, she begins to see tiny sparks of hope, fleeting, but there. She starts finding small moments of clarity, of peace. A cup of coffee shared with a friend. A solitary walk that gives her space to breathe. These small rituals, simple as they may seem, become her lifelines. They don't fix the bigger picture. But they are, for now, enough to keep her grounded in a reality that feels completely upside down. There's something deeply relatable about Amy's experience during this section, how so many people, when they go through heartbreak, find themselves slipping into isolation. Everyone else seems to move on with their lives while you're left behind, trying to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer makes sense. Friends and family want to comfort you, but sometimes their words just fall flat. And you're left feeling like no one can really understand what you're going through. But then Amy introduces another piece to the puzzle, the power of accepting the isolation. She learns that, although this journey is personal, it doesn't mean she's alone. She begins to realize that the pain, however isolating, also connects her to others who've faced similar struggles. It's a painful truth, but a truth that offers a strange kind of solidarity. There's power in this acknowledgement. It's not just about feeling isolated. It's about finding the strength to emerge from that isolation when you're ready. And this is where her path to healing truly begins. What stands out in this part is that Amy doesn't rush the recovery. She lets herself grieve without shame. She learns that it's okay to be broken for a while. And she begins to realize, slowly but surely, that her identity isn't tied to the person she was when everything was okay. She's becoming something new, and that's a powerful realization. She's not just moving on, she's evolving. Let's move on to part 5, Rebuilding, the Power of Self-Discovery. This part of the tale marks the beginning of Amy's transformation. The days of questioning and emotional fallout are still there, lingering in the background, but now, for the first time, Amy shifts her focus. It's not about who she was in the past, or the life she thought she would have. It's about who she is becoming. Rebuilding doesn't mean going back to what was, it means constructing something new, even when the old foundations are crumbled and unstable. At first, rebuilding feels uncomfortable. It feels unnatural. Amy is trying to navigate a life she never thought she would have to navigate, and it's terrifying. There's uncertainty in every step she takes, but she knows that growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in the chaos. It happens when you decide to build something stronger than you had before. She describes the experience like trying to find her way in a dark room, stumbling at times but also discovering new parts of herself along the way. One of the most powerful ideas Amy explores in this section is the concept of self-discovery. We often think of self-discovery as something that happens in moments of clarity or inspiration. But in Amy's case, self-discovery comes through moments of vulnerability, pain, and raw honesty. She realizes that she's been defining herself by the wrong metrics. For so long, she defined herself by her relationships, her connection to others, and the roles she played for those around her. But now, she has no choice but to reframe her identity. She has to learn who she is without relying on the labels and expectations she once attached to herself. It's in this process that Amy starts to ask herself the tough questions. What does she want, aside from being someone's partner, friend, or daughter? What is her passion? What makes her feel alive? These questions are not easy to face. There's a temptation to rush through them, to gloss over them, but Amy doesn't let herself off the hook. She sits with them, sometimes uncomfortably, and slowly, the answers begin to emerge. They aren't sudden revelations but rather small, quiet realizations. She realizes that she's still whole, even without the people and relationships that once seemed so essential to her happiness. Amy begins to tap into what she calls the quiet strength that comes from within. It's a strength she didn't know she had, and yet, it's been there all along. She starts to carve out space for herself, physically, emotionally, and mentally. She prioritizes her well-being, and in doing so, she makes a conscious decision to take her life back, not from anyone else, but from the parts of herself that had been drowned out by external influences. One of the key moments in this section is Amy's realization that true self-discovery isn't about perfection. It's about accepting who you are, flaws and all. It's about acknowledging the parts of yourself that have been hidden, whether out of fear, shame, or the desire to fit into someone else's vision of what you should be. She begins to accept that she has made mistakes, that she has been hurt, and that this is all part of being human. But she also learns that this doesn't define her. She's not broken, she's evolving. As Amy moves through this stage, she also realizes that she can't do it alone. Yes, the path forward is her own, but she needs a support system. It's a subtle shift. She moves from thinking of herself as isolated in her pain to recognizing that she's surrounded by people who genuinely care. Her friends, family, and even strangers become a source of strength. They don't have all the answers, but they don't need to. Just knowing that someone else sees her, hears her, and is there for her makes all the difference. Amy starts to rebuild her life by embracing self-love. And this self-love isn't some abstract concept. It's tangible. It's seen in the way she takes care of herself, physically, emotionally, and mentally. She does things for herself, not out of obligation but out of a deep understanding that she is worth the time, the effort, and the care. This part of the book is a reminder that healing isn't just about overcoming pain, it's about returning to yourself, acknowledging your worth, and moving forward with a renewed sense of purpose. What I love most about this section is how Amy shows us that rebuilding doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require an immediate return to normalcy. It simply requires the willingness to start again, to give yourself the grace to move at your own pace, and to accept that there will be moments of failure, and that's okay. In fact, those moments of failure are just part of the process. They're not setbacks, they're lessons. This is the heart of self-discovery. Understanding that your worth isn't tied to past mistakes, other people's opinions, or even your own expectations. It's about learning to honor who you are now, and who you will become. And for Amy, this chapter is not just about rebuilding, it's about reclaiming herself, piece by piece. Let's dive into part 6, Emotional Resilience, Navigating Pain with Strength from the Tell by Amy Griffin, where we see a pivotal shift in Amy's journey. This section explores emotional resilience, a concept that goes beyond simply enduring hardship to understanding how we can harness our pain to fuel personal growth and inner strength. Amy opens up about the raw truth. Emotional resilience isn't just about bouncing back from difficulties, but embracing the discomfort of life's challenges and learning to grow through them. It's about transforming pain into power, and in many ways, this part is about recognizing that healing isn't linear. It's a dynamic, ever-evolving process. In this section, Amy describes the first breakthrough she experiences in emotional resilience. For the longest time, she believed that to be resilient meant to stay strong, hide her tears, and keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. She thought that in order to be seen as strong or successful, she had to suppress her emotions and pretend that everything was okay. But as her journey unfolds, she begins to recognize that true emotional resilience comes from allowing herself to feel, to grieve, to be vulnerable, and yet, to rise again. The core of resilience, she discovers, is not about avoiding the pain of life but about learning how to live with it, and ultimately, letting it teach you. Amy reflects on the moment she realized that healing was not about trying to erase the scars, but about learning to live with them in a way that doesn't control her. This moment is profound. She realizes that life isn't about pretending to be unaffected. She learns that resilience is a process of allowing herself to feel everything that comes with life's toughest moments, and then slowly, picking up the pieces. She begins to understand that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to cry, to get angry, and to feel the deep hurt of disappointment. What matters most is how she allows those feelings to shape her, rather than breaking her. In a particularly powerful part of this chapter, Amy shares her deep realization that emotional resilience is not a destination, but a daily practice. It's not about waiting for the storm to pass and then being okay. It's about developing the strength to weather each storm, no matter how often they come. Amy begins a daily practice of emotional check-ins with herself. She develops a new habit of sitting quietly and just being with her feelings. Instead of rushing through the pain or trying to ignore it, she takes the time to acknowledge it. She asks herself what she needs emotionally in each moment, and gives herself permission to express it, whether that's by crying, journaling, or simply sitting in silence. This practice starts to build a deeper understanding of who she is and what she needs emotionally, a form of self-care that allows her to rebuild herself from within. A major shift happens when Amy stops looking at emotional pain as something to avoid or overcome, and instead starts seeing it as an essential part of her growth. She describes pain as an uncomfortable but necessary teacher. As she navigates the emotional roller coaster, she learns that resilience isn't about numbing the pain or running from it, it's about facing it head-on. The moment she stops fighting her emotions is the moment she starts to heal. She realizes that every difficult experience, every heartbreak, every moment of loss, is a part of her growth, a part of her journey to becoming a stronger, wiser version of herself. Amy also delves into the importance of boundaries and emotional resilience. She starts to understand that resilience doesn't just mean pushing through the external obstacles, but it also requires managing the internal ones. She talks about the necessity of setting emotional boundaries with people, situations, and even her own thoughts. Resilience becomes about knowing where to direct your energy and where to conserve it. She learns to say no when something doesn't serve her emotional well-being, and this is a powerful moment in her transformation. Setting boundaries is not selfish, it's necessary for emotional survival. She also discovers that emotional resilience is closely tied to mental discipline. While we can't control the external world, we can control how we respond to it. This insight allows her to start mastering her responses to both people and situations that once triggered her. A truly transformative aspect of Amy's journey is the integration of gratitude into her practice of emotional resilience. She admits that it felt impossible at first to feel grateful during her darkest moments. How can you be grateful when everything feels broken? But as she worked through the emotional fog, she began to realize that gratitude doesn't require the absence of pain. It just requires the presence of a shift in perspective. Gratitude, Amy learns, is a tool for reframing hardship. She becomes intentional about focusing on the small victories, the tiny moments of peace, the people who supported her, and the lessons learned. Gratitude is not just a fleeting emotion, it becomes a pillar for her emotional strength. It helps her see that even in the hardest times, there is something to hold on to, something worth appreciating. As Amy grows emotionally, she starts to see changes in how she approaches life's challenges. Her emotional resilience isn't about running from pain but learning to lean into it. She's no longer overwhelmed by her emotions. Instead, she stands beside them, acknowledging them with a sense of calm strength. This doesn't mean the pain goes away. It means that she now has the tools to move through it, to learn from it, and ultimately to grow from it. Through this chapter, Amy leaves readers with a profound lesson. Resilience isn't about never falling apart. It's about knowing that when you do, you have the power to rebuild. She ends this section with a powerful realization. I am not defined by my pain, but by how I rise from it. This transformation, this shift in mindset, is what truly marks her journey of healing. Let's continue with Part 7, Rebuilding from Strength, Thriving Beyond Survival in the Tell by Amy Griffin. This chapter marks a powerful turning point in Amy's story. Having learned to navigate the stormy seas of emotional resilience, she now embarks on the transformative journey of rebuilding her life, not just surviving, but thriving. This section emphasizes the critical shift from simply managing life's challenges to actively reconstructing one's path, filled with purpose and a new sense of self. Amy begins by reflecting on a key realization: resilience doesn't stop at merely enduring hardship. It's the foundation from which we can create something new, something stronger. She vividly describes how, once she started allowing herself to feel and grow from her pain, she realized that surviving wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. Surviving had been about getting through the toughest times, but thriving means building a life that is not only free of regret but also aligned with her deepest values. This is where Amy draws a profound lesson. To rebuild, we need to first let go of the past, not as a way of forgetting, but as a way of creating room for something better. As Amy works through her rebuilding process, she confronts the need for self-compassion. For so long, she had placed her worth in external validation, in what others thought of her, and in the expectations that were placed on her. But now, she begins to recognize that thriving means knowing her worth, independent of external approval. She shares an intimate moment where she realizes that true growth comes not from trying to live up to other people's standards, but from embracing her own. Amy speaks candidly about the importance of letting go of the need to constantly prove herself. Instead of chasing validation, she starts focusing on what she can give to herself. Her journey of rebuilding becomes about self-empowerment, allowing herself to become the best version of who she truly is, without compromising her integrity or values. One of the most compelling parts of this chapter is Amy's focus on creating a life that feels authentic. She discusses how, for so long, she had felt like she was living in a version of life that wasn't truly hers. She had conformed to societal pressures, and even to the expectations of family and friends. In rebuilding her life, Amy begins to ask herself the tough questions: what do I truly want? What do I value? What makes me feel alive? The process of answering these questions leads her to make bold decisions to leave behind the relationships, jobs, and lifestyle choices that no longer serve her growth. She speaks with vulnerability about how difficult it was to let go of these things, but ultimately, she realizes that in order to thrive, she must live according to her own values. This chapter is a powerful reminder that thriving doesn't mean following the traditional path, it means forging your own. The concept of designing your life becomes central in this section. Amy shares how she began to intentionally design a life that reflected her values. She speaks about the importance of carving out space for the things that truly mattered to her, whether it was creative projects, relationships, or self-care routines. Rebuilding, she realizes, is not about fitting into a pre-established mold. It's about building a structure that fits the person she has become. One of her most impactful moments in this chapter is when she begins making small, actionable steps toward a life that aligns with her vision. Each step, no matter how small, brings her closer to her goal of thriving. It's a beautiful reminder that thriving doesn't happen all at once. It's the product of consistent effort and intentional choices over time. In this section, Amy also explores the importance of creating a support system. She shares her struggles with asking for help and her deep-seated belief that she had to do everything alone. However, as she continues her journey of rebuilding, she learns that thriving is not a solitary endeavor. It requires the support and love of others. Amy begins to build a community of people who understand and encourage her growth. She speaks about the profound joy she found in letting others in and how these relationships became a pillar of her success. This part of the chapter underscores the importance of vulnerability. By letting go of the facade of perfection and allowing others to see her true self, Amy builds a network of genuine, supportive connections that help her thrive. A critical theme that emerges in Part 7 is the balance between letting go and moving forward. Amy reflects on how rebuilding her life meant leaving behind parts of her old self, old habits, old beliefs, and even old relationships. Yet, she emphasizes that this wasn't a loss. It was a necessary shedding of things that no longer served her. In the process of letting go, she made room for growth and new possibilities. She talks about the liberating feeling of releasing past attachments and stepping into a future that felt full of potential. For Amy, thriving is about embracing the unknown with confidence and curiosity, knowing that every new step is a step toward becoming her fullest self. As the chapter concludes, Amy leaves the reader with a powerful message. Thriving is not a destination but a continuous journey. Rebuilding isn't a one-time event, it's an ongoing process of growth, reinvention, and expansion. Amy reflects on the joy she now finds in the unpredictability of life, recognizing that each challenge she faces is an opportunity to rebuild yet again, stronger and wiser than before. The journey, she realizes, is not about achieving perfection but about embracing the imperfections and learning to grow through them. Let's move into Part 8, The Awakening, From Wounds to Wisdom in the Tell by Amy Griffin. This chapter takes us deeper into the emotional and spiritual layers of Amy's transformation. If the previous section was about building a stronger foundation, this part is about lighting the fire within, where the wounds of her past become more than just healed scars. They become sources of insight, strength, and wisdom. At this stage in her journey, Amy begins to notice a subtle but powerful shift. The internal battle she had been fighting for years, fear of failure, self-doubt, people-pleasing, emotional suppression, don't feel as loud anymore. It's not that they disappear completely, but she no longer lets them control her story. This awakening isn't some sudden, magical event. It's slow, it's steady, and it's deeply personal. Amy realizes that every painful moment she had endured up to this point had prepared her for this phase of clarity, where she could finally stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What can I do with it?" One of the most compelling themes in this chapter is the idea that pain can be a teacher, not in a cliché or romanticized way, but in a real, grounded, human way. Amy recounts stories where she sat with her discomfort instead of trying to numb it or run from it. And in that stillness, she began to hear her intuition louder than ever before. She talks about how this period of awakening felt like tuning into a new frequency, one that had been there all along, but was buried under the noise of expectations, trauma, and fear. It's here that she begins to live from a place of intention, no longer just reacting to life, but responding with clarity and purpose. Amy also dives into the spiritual dimension of her journey, not necessarily religious, but deeply reflective. She begins to feel connected to something bigger than herself. Whether you want to call it intuition, God, energy, or just inner peace, Amy makes it clear that healing created space for her to feel deeply grounded. She explains how this spiritual awakening wasn't about perfection or enlightenment, it was about being present. Fully present. No longer trapped in the past or obsessing about the future. She describes how her mornings became rituals of connection. Her journal became a space for honest reflection. Her conversations became more meaningful. It's like life slowed down in the best way possible, and she was finally able to breathe. A beautiful moment in this chapter is when Amy describes walking through her neighborhood one quiet morning, feeling the sunlight hit her face, and realizing that for the first time in years, she didn't feel weighed down. She felt light. Not because life was suddenly easy, but because she was different. The old version of her would have been consumed by overthinking, overwhelmed by what's next. But now, in this moment, she was simply there. Aware. Grateful. Whole. That moment may sound small, but to Amy, it was everything. It was proof that she had changed, not just on the outside, but deep within her soul. Another key insight she shares is that true awakening doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives with silence, with peace, with knowing. She writes about how there's power in not needing to prove yourself anymore. Power in living quietly but fully. This chapter is where Amy starts letting go of the urgency to fix everything, and instead begins to trust the process of life. It's a message that deeply resonates with busy professionals, career-driven individuals, and mature students alike, those who often carry the burden of responsibility, ambition, and burnout. Amy reminds us that peace is not a destination. It's a choice we can make every day, even in chaos. What also stands out in this part of the book is Amy's honest reflection on forgiveness. She revisits old wounds, not to relive them, but to release them. She realizes that holding on to resentment, anger, or regret was like dragging around invisible weights. And in forgiving, not just others, but herself, she frees up the emotional space needed to fully step into her new chapter. This doesn't mean forgetting what happened, or pretending it didn't hurt. It means acknowledging the pain, learning from it, and then letting it go. It's one of the most powerful decisions she makes, and it allows her to move forward with clarity and grace. By the end of this chapter, Amy's message is clear: awakening is about returning to yourself. The real you. The one buried under roles, trauma, expectations, and fear. Through her awakening, she doesn't become someone new. She uncovers who she's been all along. And that discovery, raw, unpolished, beautifully imperfect, is what sets her free. This chapter isn't just a turning point in Amy's life, it's a call to all of us. To slow down. To listen. To heal. And to trust that our own awakening is not only possible, it's already waiting for us when we choose to go inward. Let's continue with Part 9, Rebuilding Connection, Loving Without Losing Yourself in the Tell by Amy Griffin. This chapter is where Amy shifts from internal healing to external transformation. After doing the hard and holy work of going inward, understanding her past, forgiving herself, finding her voice, she begins to re-enter the world with new eyes. And this time, she's not trying to fit in, please everyone, or be someone she's not. This time, she's leading with authenticity. Amy begins by reflecting on how her old relationships were often built on performance. She was the friend who showed up even when her tank was empty. The daughter who made herself small to avoid conflict. The partner who prioritized their needs over her own. But in healing, Amy realized that genuine connection doesn't require shrinking, it requires honesty. Vulnerability. Boundaries. She had to learn how to reconnect with people without betraying herself in the process. There's a powerful moment when she talks about returning to friendships that once drained her. She didn't go back as the same person, though. She brought her new self, the one with boundaries, self-respect, and a deeper sense of worth. And the truth is, some of those relationships didn't survive that shift. Amy's honest about the grief that comes with letting go. But she's also clear. She would rather lose relationships that weren't real than lose herself again trying to keep them. This chapter is deeply relatable, especially for those of us navigating adulthood with careers, families, or academic goals pulling us in all directions. Amy's message here is that connection doesn't have to be chaotic or self-sacrificing. In fact, the most fulfilling relationships are the ones where both people are allowed to be fully themselves. No masks. No guilt trips. Just real, mutual care. She also begins to redefine what love looks like. Not just romantic love, but all forms of love, family, friendships, community. For years, Amy thought love meant proving her worth. Now, she sees it differently. Love, she says, is about presence. It's about showing up honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about saying, "This is who I am, and I trust that's enough." There's a touching scene where she reconnects with a family member she had distanced herself from for years. The old Amy might have swept everything under the rug to keep the peace. But now, she approaches the conversation with a mix of courage and compassion. She shares her truth without blame. She listens without defensiveness. And the result isn't a perfect resolution, but it's real. It's healing. And it's honest. That, Amy says, is more than enough. What makes this part of the book so impactful is how Amy normalizes the discomfort of this process. Rebuilding connection after trauma isn't always soft or pretty. Sometimes it means having hard conversations. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means starting over. But through it all, Amy keeps anchoring herself in the truth that she's allowed to take up space. She's allowed to ask for more. She's allowed to be loved as she is, not as who she used to pretend to be. Amy also explores how community can become a powerful force for healing when it's rooted in honesty. She begins seeking out spaces where she doesn't have to perform, groups of women, mentors, and kindred spirits who hold her accountable while also holding space for her growth. These are the relationships that nourish her now. The ones that don't require her to earn love, but simply allow her to receive it. Toward the end of the chapter, Amy reflects on how connection is no longer about quantity, it's about depth. She doesn't need a million friends. She needs a few real ones. The kind who see her, know her story, and love her through it. And she's learning to be that kind of person for others too. This part of her journey is so deeply relevant in today's world, where it's easy to get caught in performative friendships, social media highlight reels, or shallow connections. Amy reminds us that real love starts with real presence. And to find that kind of connection, we have to show up as our real selves first. In the end, rebuilding connection is about learning to love without losing yourself. It's about no longer settling for relationships that require self-abandonment. It's about knowing your worth and walking away from anything that doesn't honor it. It's brave, it's messy, and it's beautiful. Let's dive into part 10, Becoming the Tell, Living a Life That Speaks, the final and most soul-stirring section of The Tell by Amy Griffin. This is where Amy brings it all home. Not just as a writer, but as a woman who has walked through the fire, sat with the ashes, and now rises, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. In this final part, Amy unpacks what it really means to become your story. Not the wounds, not the shame, but the transformation. This chapter isn't just about survival anymore. It's about legacy. She starts with a powerful reflection. We spend so much time trying to rewrite the past, when the real power is in telling the truth about it. That right there is the heart of the tell. It's not about pretending the pain didn't happen. It's about honoring what it taught you, then choosing what you'll do with that truth. Amy describes a shift that happens when you no longer carry your story like a secret, but like a torch. Your pain becomes purpose. Your voice becomes a mirror for others. She talks about walking into rooms and no longer feeling like she needs to shrink, explain, or convince anyone of her worth. She is the evidence. Her life is the proof. That's what it means to be the tell, to live a life that speaks truth louder than any performance ever could. This chapter is soaked in personal examples of how Amy started showing up differently. She no longer overcommits to prove she's valuable. She no longer stays silent to avoid making waves. She no longer tolerates spaces that don't honor her growth. Her presence alone tells a story now. A story of someone who's healed, who's still healing, and who is not afraid to be seen. She challenges us to ask ourselves, what is your life telling the world right now? Is it saying you're exhausted from pretending? Is it saying you're still living by old stories that no longer fit? Or is it saying you've chosen truth, freedom, and integrity, even when it's uncomfortable? Amy invites readers to embrace the idea that our healing doesn't just serve us, it serves others. When you show up authentically, you give others permission to do the same. When you set boundaries, you teach others how to respect their own. When you tell the truth, you become a lighthouse in a world full of masks. One of the most emotional moments is when Amy writes about the first time she stood in front of a group of women and shared her story without shame. Not a curated version. Not a polished one. The real one. And the room didn't reject her. It leaned in. That moment, she says, changed her life. Because it wasn't just about being heard, it was about being seen. And that kind of visibility can heal generations. She ends this chapter not with answers, but with an invitation. To live your life in a way that reflects your growth. To stop hiding. To stop shrinking. To stop waiting for someone else to give you permission to be whole. You already have it. You are the tell. This final part is so powerful because it reminds us that healing isn't just about looking back. It's about moving forward with intention. It's about becoming someone who lives, loves, leads, and speaks from a place of deep alignment. And that, Amy says, is the most radical thing we can do in a world that constantly tells us to be anything but ourselves. So if you've ever felt like your story disqualifies you from happiness, success, or connection, this final chapter will be a full-body reminder that it qualifies you even more. Because you've lived. You've learned. And now you get to lead. So here we are, at the end of the tell. But really, this doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a beginning. A soft, powerful unraveling of all the stories we've carried for far too long. Stories shaped by fear, by silence, by survival. Amy Griffin has done something rare in today's world. She's pulled back the curtain on the performance so many of us are putting on every single day. And in doing so, she's given us permission to stop pretending and start living with truth. This book wasn't about surface-level motivation. It didn't try to wrap up trauma with a bow or offer quick fixes to deep wounds. What Amy gave us instead was something much more valuable, an invitation to reclaim our own narrative, piece by piece. The tell is the story of what happens when a woman stops living for approval and starts living in alignment. It's a roadmap back to yourself. For the busy professional who has checked every box but still feels a quiet emptiness at the end of each day, this book is a mirror. It asks you to look beyond your productivity, beyond the perfectly curated resume, and ask, is this version of me telling the truth? For the ambitious, driven woman who learned to equate love with performance, silence with safety, and strength with suffering, this book is a lifeline. It reminds you that your worth isn't something to be earned through self-denial. It already lives within you, underneath the roles, the routines, and the rehearsed smiles. And for the mature student, maybe the mom going back to school, the woman rebuilding after divorce, the soul who thought it was too late, the tell says, your story isn't over. In fact, this might be the chapter that changes everything. Amy doesn't just share her pain, she shares her power. And in doing so, she models what it looks like to become the tell. To be the person who walks into a room and doesn't have to say a word for people to feel the strength in her presence. She doesn't need to over-explain, over-give, or overcompensate. Her life speaks for her. And that's what you're being invited to do. To live a life that reflects who you really are, not who you were taught to be. To set boundaries like your peace depends on it. To tell the truth even when it shakes your voice. To rise from your story, not by erasing it, but by owning it fully. The beauty of the tell is that it reminds us, the things we were most afraid to say out loud are often the very things that connect us to each other. The shame we hid in silence? It becomes light when spoken. The grief we buried in productivity? It becomes wisdom when we face it. The fear we dressed up as strength? It transforms into courage when we stop pretending. So what now? Now it's your turn. Your turn to rewrite the story. Your turn to become the tell. Your turn to live in a way that says, I know who I am, and I'm not afraid to be seen. You are not too late. You are not too broken. And you are absolutely allowed to start again. This is your beginning. If you found this summary insightful and valuable, don't forget to show your support by subscribing to the Mindful Brief on YouTube. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this audiobook summary, share it with your peers, friends, or family who might benefit from it, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Your engagement helps us create more in-depth and valuable content for you. Stay tuned for more summaries, insights, and strategies to elevate your knowledge and career. Subscribe now and be part of the journey.